Sarah Martinez stepped into the women's locker room at Fort Braxton, her boots echoing against the concrete floor. The smell of disinfectant mixed with sweat hung heavy in the air. She had been assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division just 2 weeks ago, fresh out of basic training and eager to prove herself. At 22, she was one of the youngest soldiers in her unit and definitely the smallest at barely 5 feet 4 inches tall. The locker room fell silent as she entered. 3 women were already there, changing into their PT gear. Sarah recognized them immediately. Corporal Jessica Banks, Sergeant Lisa Thompson, and Private First Class Amanda Clark. They were all seasoned soldiers who had been at the base for years. Well, look who's here, Jessica said, not bothering to lower her voice. The new girl who thinks she can make it in the real army. Sarah kept her head down and walked to her assigned locker. She had heard the whispers in the mess hall, seen the eye rolls during formation. Being small and quiet had made her an easy target for criticism from day one. I heard she scored barely passing on her fitness test. Amanda chimed in, loud enough for Sarah to hear every word. How did someone like that even make it through basic? Lisa laughed harshly. Probably got special treatment. You know how they lower standards these days. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she spun the combination on her locker. She wanted to defend herself, to tell them about the countless hours she had spent training, about how she had actually scored above average on most of her tests. But she knew speaking up would only make things worse. Look at those tiny arms, Jessica continued, flexing her own muscular biceps. She probably can't even carry a full pack on a march. We're going to have to babysit her in the field. The comment stung because Sarah had been worried about the same things herself. She had always been smaller than her peers, even in high school. When she decided to join the Army, her own family had expressed doubts. Her father, a former Marine, had tried to talk her out of it. The military isn't a place for delicate flowers, Mija, he had said. You need to be tough, both physically and mentally. Are you sure you're ready for that? Sarah had insisted she was ready, but now, standing in this locker room while 3 experienced soldiers mocked her, she wondered if everyone had been right to doubt her. I bet she'll wash out within a month, Amanda predicted. Some people just aren't cut out for military life. If she even makes it that long, Lisa added. Wait until she sees real combat training. She'll probably cry and ask to go home to mommy. Sarah finished changing into her PT uniform and grabbed her gear. As she headed toward the door, Jessica stepped directly into her path. Hey, new girl, Jessica said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Just so you know, this isn't summer camp. We don't have time to hold your hand out there. If you can't keep up, you'll put all of us in danger. Sarah looked up at Jessica, who was at least 6 inches taller and probably 50 pounds heavier. Understand, she said quietly. Do you? Jessica leaned closer. Because I don't think you do. I think you're just another civilian playing soldier. But this is real life, and real soldiers don't have time for pretenders. With that, Jessica and her friends pushed past Sarah and left the locker room, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Sarah stood alone for a moment, fighting back tears. She had known military life would be challenging, but she hadn't expected this level of hostility from her own teammates. She thought about her grandmother, Rosa, who had raised her after her mother died. Rosa had always told her that she was stronger than she looked, that her size didn't determine her worth. Mija, the biggest battles are won not with muscles, but with heart and mind, Rosa used to say. Remember that when the world tries to make you feel small. Taking a deep breath, Sarah straightened her shoulders and headed out to join her unit for morning PT. She arrived at the assembly area to find the rest of her platoon already formed up. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes, the commanding officer, stood at the front with his arms crossed. Martinez, he barked as she jogged up. You're 30 seconds late. Sorry, sir, Sarah replied, quickly finding her place in formation. She could feel the eyes of her fellow soldiers on her, could practically hear their thoughts. The new girl who couldn't even show up on time. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was known for his strict discipline and high standards. At 45, he was a decorated veteran with 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. His reputation for toughness was legendary throughout the base. Today we're doing a 5-mile run followed by combat drills, Hayes announced. Anyone who can't keep up will be doing extra PT this weekend. The run began at a brutal pace. Sarah found herself struggling to keep up with the longer strides of her taller teammates. Her lungs burned as she fought to maintain the rhythm. Behind her, she could hear Jessica and her friends making comments. Told you she couldn't hack it, Jessica panted. Look at her already falling behind. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed harder, forcing her legs to move faster despite the burning sensation spreading through her muscles. She had trained for this, running extra miles on her own time, building up her endurance. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fail. By the 3rd mile, several soldiers had dropped back, but Sarah was still with the main group. Her face was flushed red and sweat poured down her back, but she refused to slow down. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes ran at the front, setting a pace that challenged even the most experienced soldiers. "Come on, Martinez," someone shouted from behind. Sarah was surprised to realize it was Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, one of the squad leaders. "You're doing great. Keep it up." The encouragement gave her a boost of energy. Not everyone was against her. She focused on Mike's words and the steady rhythm of her breathing, blocking out the negative voices. As they approached the final mile, Sarah noticed that Jessica was starting to struggle. The taller woman's breathing had become labored, and she was no longer making snide comments. Amanda had already fallen back with the slower group. Only Lisa was still keeping pace near the front. Sarah found a reserve of strength she didn't know she had. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, and she thought about all the people who had told her she wasn't strong enough. With a burst of determination, she actually began to move up in the pack, passing several soldiers who had started stronger but were now fading. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes glanced back and noticed her progress. His stern expression didn't change, but Sarah thought she saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. They finished the run back at the starting point, and Sarah was among the first 15 finishers out of 30 soldiers. She bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air, but feeling triumphant. She had not only kept up, she had excelled. "Not bad," Martinez, Sergeant Rodriguez said, patting her on the shoulder. "That was some impressive running for someone your size." Jessica finally staggered in nearly 2 minutes later, her face purple with exertion. She shot Sarah a look of pure hatred, but said nothing. "All right, people," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called out. "Combat drills start in 5 minutes. We're doing urban warfare scenarios today, so I hope you're all sharp." The combat training proved to be even more challenging than the run. They were divided into teams and given various scenarios to navigate: hostage situations, building clearances, and tactical movements under fire. Sarah found herself grouped with soldiers she didn't know well, which was both intimidating and liberating. During the first drill, a simulated building clearance, Sarah's natural agility became an advantage. While larger soldiers struggled to navigate tight spaces quickly, she could move through doorways and around obstacles with fluid grace. Her small stature, which had been mocked in the locker room, allowed her to take positions that others couldn't manage. "Martinez, take point on the next entry," ordered Staff Sergeant Williams, the drill instructor. "Show me what you can do." Sarah's heart raced as she approached the door. This was her chance to prove herself. She had studied urban combat techniques extensively during her training, memorizing every protocol and strategy. Now it was time to put that knowledge to work. She signaled to her team, took a deep breath, and moved through the door with precision and speed. Her movements were calculated and smooth, clearing corners and checking blind spots exactly as she had been trained. When a target popped up unexpectedly, her reaction time was lightning fast. "Excellent work, Martinez," Staff Sergeant Williams called out after the drill ended. "That's textbook urban entry technique." For the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, Sarah felt a genuine smile cross her face. She was good at this. All those hours of studying and practicing were paying off. The rest of the day continued in a similar pattern. While Sarah still faced skeptical looks and occasional snide remarks, her performance was beginning to speak for itself. She excelled at marksmanship, hitting targets that some of the more experienced soldiers missed. Her knowledge of tactical procedures was thorough and accurate. But it was during the final exercise of the day that something truly remarkable happened. The scenario involved a simulated rescue mission where teams had to extract a wounded soldier from a hostile area while under fire. Sarah's team was struggling with the logistics. Their designated team leader had been killed early in the exercise, and the larger soldiers were having difficulty maneuvering the casualty through a narrow passage while maintaining defensive positions. "This isn't working," muttered Private Johnson, one of Sarah's teammates. "We need a new plan." Sarah studied the layout and saw something the others had missed. Her size would allow her to take a flanking route that the others couldn't use, potentially creating a distraction that would give her team the opening they needed. "What if I go around through that drainage pipe?" she suggested quietly. "I could create a diversion while you move the casualty through the main passage." Private Johnson looked skeptical. "That's pretty risky. If you get caught out there alone." "I can do it," Sarah insisted. "I'm fast, and I know the route." They were running out of time and options. Finally, Johnson nodded. "Okay, Martinez. Give us 30 seconds, then make your move." Sarah crawled through the narrow drainage pipe, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She could hear the simulated gunfire above her and knew her teammates were counting on her. When she emerged on the other side, she was behind enemy lines, exactly where she needed to be. Her distraction worked perfectly. While the opposing force dealt with her unexpected flanking maneuver, her team successfully evacuated the casualty. The exercise ended with their complete success, and Staff Sergeant Williams was clearly impressed. "Outstanding tactical thinking, Martinez," he said during the debrief. "You identified an opportunity that others missed and executed it flawlessly." As the day ended and soldiers headed back to the barracks, Sarah felt a cautious optimism. She had proven that she could perform under pressure, that her size could be an asset rather than a liability. Maybe she really did belong here after all. But her optimism was short-lived. As she entered the barracks, she overheard Jessica talking to a group of soldiers near the common area. "Don't be fooled by one good day," Jessica was saying. "She got lucky today, that's all. When things get really tough, when lives are actually on the line, she'll fold like a house of cards. Mark my words." Several soldiers nodded in agreement. Sarah realized that proving herself once wasn't going to be enough. She would have to earn respect one day at a time, one challenge at a time. The real test was yet to come. That night, as she lay in her narrow bunk, Sarah stared at the ceiling and thought about her grandmother's words once again. Rosa had faced her own share of discrimination as a young Hispanic woman trying to make her way in the world. She had always told Sarah that persistence and integrity would eventually win out over prejudice and doubt. "The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire," Mija, Rosa had said. "Let them underestimate you. It will make your victory all the sweeter." Sarah closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She would continue to work harder than anyone expected, to push herself beyond what others thought possible. She would show them all that strength came in many forms, and that the smallest soldier could have the biggest heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and she would be ready for all of them. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first day of combat training, and she had settled into a routine of constant preparation and relentless self-improvement. Every morning, she woke up an hour before reveille to run extra laps around the base. Every evening, she stayed late at the shooting range, perfecting her marksmanship until her hands were steady and her aim was true. The mockery from Jessica and her group had not stopped, but it had evolved into something more subtle and perhaps more dangerous. Instead of open hostility, they now employed tactical exclusion. They would fall silent when Sarah approached during conversations. They would fail to pass along informal information that could help her navigate base politics. They made sure she felt isolated and alone. "She thinks she's so special," Sarah overheard Amanda saying to a group of newer recruits during lunch. acting like she has something to prove. Trying too hard just makes her look desperate. Sarah had learned to ignore these comments, focusing instead on building relationships with soldiers who judged her by her performance rather than her appearance. Sergeant Rodriguez had become an unexpected mentor, offering tactical advice and encouragement. Private Johnson, her teammate from the rescue exercise, had begun including her in study groups where they reviewed military protocols and shared knowledge. But it was her growing relationship with Lieutenant Colonel Hayes that surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. The commanding officer had begun to take notice of her dedication and consistency. During training exercises, he would position himself where he could observe her performance, making notes on a small pad he always carried. Martinez, he called out after a particularly challenging navigation exercise. A word. Sarah jogged over to where he stood under a cluster of oak trees, her heart racing with nervous anticipation. Hayes was known for his blunt feedback, both positive and negative. Soldiers either left conversations with him feeling motivated or completely deflated. "Sir," she said, standing at attention. "At ease," Hayes replied, his weathered face unreadable. "I've been watching your progress over the past few weeks. Your improvement curve is impressive." Sarah felt a flutter of pride, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Hayes continued. "I'm not in the business of handing out participation trophies. But I am in the business of recognizing potential when I see it." He paused, studying her with the intense gaze that had intimidated countless soldiers over his long career. "I'm putting you forward for advanced tactical training. It's a specialized program that only the top 15% of soldiers are selected for." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Advanced tactical training was legendary among the enlisted ranks. It was where the Army identified and developed its future leaders, where ordinary soldiers were transformed into elite operatives. Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "Don't thank me," Hayes repeated. "Earn it. The training starts in 2 weeks. It's 8 weeks of the most intensive military education you'll ever experience. The dropout rate is over 40%, and those are among soldiers who are already considered exceptional." He handed her a folder containing preliminary materials. "Study this. Live it. Breathe it. Because if you fail, it won't just be a reflection on you. It'll be a reflection on my judgment in selecting you." As Hayes walked away, Sarah clutched the folder to her chest, hardly believing what had just happened. She had been selected for advanced training based on merit, based on her demonstrated abilities. For the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, she felt like she truly belonged. But her moment of triumph was quickly overshadowed by the reaction from her peers. Word spread quickly through the barracks, and by dinner time, everyone knew about Sarah's selection. "This has got to be some kind of mistake," Jessica said loudly enough for half the mess hall to hear. "There's no way she earned that spot legitimately." "Maybe they needed to fill a quota," Lisa added with a smirk. Diversity and all that." The implication stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She had worked incredibly hard to get where she was, had outperformed many of her critics in multiple exercises. Yet they would always find a way to diminish her achievements, to suggest that she hadn't truly earned her success. Sergeant Rodriguez, who was sitting at a nearby table, stood up and walked over to where Jessica was holding court. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying clear authority. Jessica immediately straightened up. Rodriguez was well respected among the enlisted ranks, known for his fairness and his battlefield experience. Crossing him would be a career-limiting move. "No problem, Sergeant," Jessica replied. "Just discussing the training selections." "Good," Rodriguez said. "Then you'll be happy to hear that Martinez earned her spot through consistently superior performance in tactical exercises, marksmanship, and leadership potential." Her selection was unanimous among the review board. He looked around the table at Jessica's supporters. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to improve their own performance and maybe get selected next time. The group fell silent, but Sarah could see the resentment burning in their eyes. She knew this wouldn't be the end of their opposition to her success. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparation for the advanced training. The preliminary materials covered everything from advanced combat tactics to psychological warfare, from leadership theory to international military law. She studied late into the night, often being the last person in the common areas before lights out. Her dedication did not go unnoticed by everyone. Some of the newer soldiers began to look up to her, seeing in her an example of what was possible through hard work and determination. A few even started joining her for extra PT sessions, forming an informal training group that met before dawn. "You're becoming a role model," Private Johnson observed one morning as they finished a particularly grueling workout session. "These kids see that you never give up, and it's inspiring them to push themselves harder." Sarah hadn't thought about it that way, but she realized he was right. 3 newer recruits had begun following her training regimen, and their performance had noticeably improved. She was accidentally becoming a leader through example rather than appointment. The night before she was scheduled to leave for advanced training, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes knocked on her door during evening hours, a breach of protocol that immediately caught her attention. "Sir," she said, opening the door and standing at attention. "Walk with me, Martinez," Hayes said. They walked in silence across the base, past the training grounds where Sarah had first proven herself, past the mess hall where she had endured countless mocking comments. Finally, Hayes stopped near the memorial wall where the names of fallen soldiers were etched in black granite. "Do you know why I selected you for this training?" Hayes asked. Sarah had wondered about that question for weeks. "Because of my performance in exercises, sir." Hayes shook his head. "That's part of it, but not the whole story. I selected you because you understand something that most soldiers never learn." He gestured toward the memorial wall. "Every name on this wall represents someone who faced impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. They understood that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of fear." Sarah remained silent, sensing that Hayes was building towards something important. "You've been facing impossible odds since the day you arrived here," Hayes continued. "You're smaller, younger, and less experienced than most of your peers. You've dealt with prejudice and skepticism from people who should have been supporting you. But you never quit. You never complained. You just worked harder." He turned to face her directly. "That's the kind of character the Army needs in its leaders. Technical skills can be taught. Equipment can be upgraded. But character, real character, that's something you either have or you don't." Hayes reached into his jacket and pulled out a small pin. It was the insignia of the Advanced Tactical Training Program, a silver eagle surrounded by crossed swords. "This is your preliminary graduation pin," he said, handing it to her. "You'll receive your official one when you complete the program. But I want you to have this now as a reminder of why you were selected." Sarah accepted the pin with hands that trembled slightly. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Hayes replied. "Just remember this conversation when the training gets tough. And it will get tough. There will be moments when you want to quit, when the instructors are pushing you beyond what you think you can handle. In those moments, remember that I believe in you. More importantly, remember that you've already proven you belong here." As they walked back toward the barracks, Hayes shared more details about what Sarah could expect from the advanced training. The program was held at a specialized facility in Virginia, where elite instructors from various branches of the military would push the selected soldiers to their absolute limits. "The physical challenges are intense," Hayes explained, "but the mental challenges are even harder. They'll test your decision-making under extreme pressure, your ability to lead when everything is falling apart around you. They'll try to break you down psychologically and then see if you can build yourself back up." Sarah listened intently, absorbing every detail. She knew that the next 8 weeks will be the most challenging of her military career, possibly of her entire life. "What happens if I succeed?" she asked. Hayes smiled for the first time in their conversation. "If you succeed, you'll be qualified for special operations units, advanced leadership positions, or specialized assignments that most soldiers only dream about. You'll have proven that you're among the very best the Army has to offer. They had reached the entrance to the barracks. Hayes stopped and extended his hand. "Good luck, Martinez. Make us all proud." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "I will, sir. I promise." As Hayes walked away, Sarah stood alone in the cool evening air, holding the pin he had given her. Tomorrow, she would leave Fort Braxton for the most important challenge of her military career. She thought about her grandmother Rosa, about all the people who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. She also thought about Jessica and the others who had mocked her in the locker room, who had tried to convince her that she didn't belong in the military. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that would prove them wrong once and for all. Sarah looked up at the stars scattered across the clear night sky and made herself a new promise. She would not just survive the advanced training, she would excel at it. She would return to Fort Braxton as a proven leader, as someone who had earned respect through competence and character. The girl who had been mocked for her size and questioned for her abilities was about to become something extraordinary. And when she returned, she would be wearing more than just a pin on her uniform. She would be wearing the confidence that comes from knowing, without any doubt, that she belonged among the very best. The next morning, as Sarah packed her gear for the journey to Virginia, she found a note slipped under her door. It was from Sergeant Rodriguez. "Martinez, remember that strength isn't about how much you can lift. It's about how much you can carry and keep moving forward. You've got more strength than anyone I've ever known. Go show them what real soldiers are made of." Rodriguez. Sarah folded the note carefully and placed it in her breast pocket, right next to her grandmother's old rosary that she always carried for luck. She was ready for whatever came next. 8 weeks later, Sarah Martinez stood on the platform at Fort Braxton's train station, wearing a uniform that looked identical to the one she had left in, but feeling like a completely different person. The advanced tactical training had pushed her to limits she never knew existed, had tested every aspect of her physical, mental, and emotional strength. She had not just survived, she had graduated at the top of her class. The journey back to base gave her time to reflect on everything that had changed. The intensive training had included urban warfare in mock city environments, survival exercises in hostile terrain, advanced marksmanship under extreme conditions, and leadership scenarios where a wrong decision could mean simulated casualties. She had excelled in every area, earning the respect of instructors who were known for their impossibly high standards. But the most significant change wasn't in her skills or knowledge. It was in how she carried herself. The uncertain young woman who had been mocked in the locker room had been replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was capable of achieving. As the train pulled into Fort Braxton, Sarah could see a small crowd gathered on the platform. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was there, along with Sergeant Rodriguez and several other soldiers she recognized. But what surprised her most was seeing some of the newer recruits who had trained with her before she left, holding a small handmade banner that read, "Welcome back, Sergeant Martinez." The promotion had come as part of her graduation from advanced training. She was now Sergeant Sarah Martinez, qualified for specialized assignments and leadership roles that had seemed impossible just 3 months ago. "What does it feel to be back?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked as she stepped off the train. "Different," Sarah replied honestly. "Everything looks the same, but I see it all differently now." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached with his characteristic serious expression, but Sarah caught a hint of pride in his eyes. "Welcome back, Sergeant Martinez," he said formally. "I trust the training met your expectations?" "It exceeded them, sir," Sarah replied. "Thank you for believing in me enough to recommend me." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Your instructors sent glowing reports. Apparently, you set several new records in the program." As they walked toward the main base, Sarah noticed the subtle differences in how people looked at her. The sergeant's stripes on her sleeve commanded a level of respect that hadn't been there before. Soldiers she didn't recognize nodded respectfully as she passed. Even some of the soldiers who had been skeptical of her before seemed to view her with new interest. But the real test would come when she encountered Jessica and her group of critics. Sarah didn't have to wait long. As she entered the mess hall for dinner that evening, she saw Jessica, Lisa, and Amanda, sitting at their usual table. The conversation stopped when they noticed her, and Sarah could feel their eyes following her as she moved through the serving line. She had decided during the train ride that she wouldn't seek out confrontation, but she also wouldn't avoid it if it came to her. She was no longer the uncertain recruit who had tried to make herself invisible. Sarah chose a table in the center of the dining area, where she could be clearly seen by everyone. Within minutes, several of the soldiers she had trained with before her departure joined her, eager to hear about her experiences. "Is it true you scored the highest marksmanship rating in the program's history?" asked Private Thompson, one of the newer soldiers who had looked up to her. "Records aren't what matter," Sarah replied, though she couldn't hide her smile. "What matters is being prepared for whatever mission comes next." As they talked, Sarah noticed Jessica approaching their table. The older soldier's expression was unreadable, but there was definitely tension in her posture. "Sergeant Martinez," Jessica said, emphasizing the rank with what might have been sarcasm or genuine acknowledgement. "Congratulations on your graduation." "Thank you, Corporal Banks," Sarah replied evenly. Jessica hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to say more. Finally, she leaned slightly closer. "Look, I may have been skeptical of you when you first arrived, but completing that program is no joke. Whatever my personal opinions might be, I respect what you've accomplished." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more than Sarah had expected. She nodded acknowledgement. "I appreciate that, Corporal. We're all on the same team here." Jessica nodded curtly and returned to her table, but the dynamic had clearly shifted. Other soldiers had witnessed the exchange, had seen Jessica show respect for Sarah's achievements. The isolation tactics that had been used against her before would be much harder to maintain now. The next morning brought Sarah's first real test as a newly promoted sergeant. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called her to his office and presented her with her new assignment. "We have a situation that requires someone with your particular skill set," Hayes explained, handing her a classified briefing folder. "A joint training exercise with Allied forces. They specifically requested our best urban warfare specialist to lead a demonstration scenario." Sarah opened the folder and read the details. She would be leading a team of 12 soldiers in a complex urban rescue mission, being observed by military officials from 3 different countries. The exercise was designed to showcase American tactical capabilities and leadership quality. "Sir, this is a significant responsibility," Sarah said, studying the mission parameters. "Yes, it is," Hayes agreed, "which is why I'm assigning it to you. The exercise takes place in 2 weeks. You'll have full authority to select your team and design the training regimen to prepare for it." This was the moment Sarah had been working toward without even realizing it. She was being entrusted with a mission that would reflect not just on her own abilities, but on the reputation of the entire unit. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into preparation with the same intensity she had brought to her own training. She carefully selected her team, choosing soldiers based on complementary skills rather than personal relationships. To everyone's surprise, she included Jessica Banks in her roster. "Why her?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked when he saw the team list. "You could have any soldier you wanted." "Because she's good at her job," Sarah replied simply. "And because the mission is more important than personal history." The training regimen Sarah designed was challenging, but focused. She identified the specific skills the team would need for the demonstration scenario and created exercises that would develop those capabilities. Her approach was methodical and professional, earning respect from even the most experienced soldiers on her team. Jessica, in particular, seemed surprised by Sarah's leadership style. Instead of the authoritarian approach many new sergeants adopted, Sarah led through competence and clear communication. She explained the reasoning behind every decision, made sure each team member understood their role completely, and created an environment where questions and suggestions were welcomed. "You know," Jessica said during one of their final training sessions, "I may have misjudged you when you first arrived." Sarah looked up from the tactical map she was studying. "How so? I thought you were just another recruit who would wash out after a few weeks." "I didn't see." Jessica paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't see the steel underneath." It was the closest thing to an apology Sarah was likely to get, and she accepted it gracefully. "We all have to prove ourselves," Sarah said. "The only difference is that some of us get more chances to do it than others." The day of the demonstration exercise arrived with perfect weather and high stakes. Military observers from Britain, Canada, and Australia had come specifically to evaluate American urban warfare techniques. Sarah's team would be performing under intense scrutiny, with any mistakes potentially affecting international military relationships. As Sarah suited up in full combat gear, she felt the familiar pre-mission nervousness that had become her companion over the months of training. But now she knew how to channel that nervous energy into focus and determination. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached her as she conducted final equipment checks with her team. "Remember, Martinez, you're not just representing yourself today. You're representing everything we've built here." "Understood, sir," Sarah replied. "We're ready." The exercise scenario involved rescuing hostages from a multi-story building while hostile forces controlled the surrounding area. Sarah's team would have to demonstrate tactical movement, combat effectiveness, and crisis decision-making, all while being observed by some of the most experienced military minds in the world. As they approached the starting position, Sarah looked at her team, 12 soldiers who had trained together intensively for 2 weeks, who now moved with the coordination of a precision instrument. Jessica caught her eye and nodded confidently. "Let's show them what American soldiers can do," Sarah said quietly. The exercise began with simulated enemy fire from multiple directions. Sarah's team responded exactly as they had practiced, moving with fluid coordination through the urban environment. Each soldier knew their role perfectly, and Sarah orchestrated their movements with calm precision. When they reached the target building, Sarah made a split-second decision to modify their planned approach. She had noticed a tactical opportunity that their training scenarios hadn't included, a way to reach the hostages faster while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. "Change of plans," she announced over the radio. "Banks, take your squad through the east entrance. Rodriguez, provide overwatch from Building 2. I'm taking point through the main entrance." The modification worked perfectly. Sarah's natural agility allowed her to navigate the building's obstacles quickly, while her team provided exactly the support she needed at precisely the right moments. When they reached the hostages, they executed the extraction flawlessly. The entire exercise took less than 12 minutes from start to finish. When the all-clear signal was given, Sarah's team had successfully completed the mission without a single simulated casualty. The international observers were clearly impressed. Sarah could see them taking notes and speaking animatedly among themselves as her team regrouped. Colonel Patricia Williams, the British observer, approached Sarah as she removed her helmet. "Sergeant Martinez, that was exceptional tactical leadership. The modification you made to your approach showed exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we hope to see in our own officers." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was beaming with pride as the other observers offered similar praise. Sarah's performance had not only met expectations, it had exceeded them dramatically. As the day ended and the official ceremonies concluded, Sarah found herself back in the same locker room where her journey at Fort Braxton had begun. But this time, she wasn't alone and uncertain. This time, she was surrounded by teammates who respected her leadership and looked to her for guidance. Jessica approached her as they changed out of their gear. "I owe you an apology," Jessica said quietly. "Not just for today, but for everything since you arrived. I let my own insecurities make me treat you unfairly." Sarah looked at the woman who had once been her biggest critic. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." "I've learned," Jessica replied. "You've earned every bit of success you've achieved. And more than that, you've made all of us better soldiers by showing us what real leadership looks like." As Sarah walked out of the locker room for the last time as the uncertain recruit she had once been, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The mocking voices that had once filled this space with cruelty and doubt had been replaced by respect and admiration. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her grandmother, Rosa. Mija, I saw the news article about your promotion and the successful exercise. I always knew you had fire in your heart. Your mother would be so proud. Sarah smiled as she typed back. The fire was always there, abuela. I just had to learn how to use it. That evening, as she sat in her new quarters, the private room that came with her sergeant rank, Sarah looked at the various commendations and certificates that now decorated her wall. The pin Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had given her before advanced training held a place of honor among them. But the most meaningful item on her wall was a simple photo her grandmother had sent. Sarah at age 8, standing proudly in a soccer uniform despite being the smallest player on her team. Even then, she had been proving that size didn't determine strength. The girl who had been mocked in a locker room had become a woman who wore the commander's respect with dignity and pride. She had not just survived the challenges thrown at her. She had used them to forge herself into something stronger than anyone could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to lead and excel. But tonight, Sarah Martinez sat in her quarters as a proven leader, a respected sergeant, and a soldier who had earned her place through courage, competence, and an unshakable belief in herself. The journey that had begun with cruel laughter had ended with well-deserved applause. And this was just the beginning of what Sergeant Sarah Martinez would accomplish in her military career.